The Egyptian desert hit 40 degrees Celsius easily. And despite that, the ancient Egyptians built wind catchers before the Romans were even a thought. They turned clay pots into fridges. They stripped down naked in public, just to keep their organs from cooking. And when the heat hit too hard, they stopped and walked off the job. Now that's living smart, don't you say? But what does that say about us? Why do we worship hard work while ignoring burnout? Why do we build cities that trap heat and call it progress? And how did ancient peasants beat the sun while we, the so-called modernists, melt with central air and iced lattes? Well, that's exactly what we're going to find out in this episode. Now, 40 degrees Celsius is brutal, even by desert standards. And yet somehow, ancient Egyptian peasants managed to work, farm, build and raise families in it. They got creative. Archaeological digs, old papyrus texts and modern climate studies all point to a surprisingly clever set of strategies. From the way they built their homes to what they wore, when they worked, and how they ate and drank, everything was tuned to beat the heat. Now, some of those tricks have been around for centuries, from the Old Kingdom to the New, from the Nile heartland to the Fayoum oasis, to the Delta. Different landscapes, same enemy, the scorching heat. Let's start with the houses. As you might already know, ancient Egyptian homes were made of sun-dried mud brick. Simple stuff, but genius in action. You see, mud brick absorbed heat during the day, then slowly released it at night, sort of like a giant thermal battery. Archaeologists described most peasant homes as 1 to 3 room setups, mud brick walls and dirt floors topped with straw or reed mats, and roofs made from palm logs or bundled stems. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked, especially in drier spots like Fayoum or the Delta, where the materials also helped keep mold at bay. Now, picture settlements like Giza during the Old Kingdom, or Lahun and Kahun in the middle. Houses were packed close together. Just so you know, that wasn't a mistake. It created shared shade and cut down direct sun exposure. It's like living in a mud brick version of a modern alleyway. Some buildings even got a coat of whitewash, like Amenhotep III's palace at Malkata. You see, the trick here is white reflects sunlight. And while palaces went all in, it's likely modest homes used the trick too. Windows, however, were rare. Too much sun and too much wind. So instead, houses had narrow roof slits or small vents to let hot air out. And in places like Deir el-Medina, vents faced courtyards or narrow streets to catch the breeze. Wealthier homes, on the other hand, went a step further. They used roof openings aligned with the north wind. And then there's the Malkaf, basically a rooftop wind catcher. It shows up in a tomb painting of Nebamun, around 1350 BC. So yes, the New Kingdom had passive cooling tech that later showed up in medieval Cairo. Even basic homes had their own version of this. They had slatted vents and porous screens, an early form of mashrabia, and mats over doors to keep out sunlight while letting air in. Courtyards, too, were put into good use. They created airflow and added shade. Big houses, on the other hand, had walled courtyards that cooled down overnight, setting up convection currents that made rooms bearable by day. But smaller homes used open kitchens or animal pens. Same principle, different scale. And all of it added up to a kind of low-tech climate control. It wasn't perfect, but it was smart and surprisingly effective. But on average, towns had narrow, winding streets that stayed shaded and helped funnel breezes through. In Amarna, during the New Kingdom, houses were crammed in tight. They were angled to dodge the worst of the sun. One wall's shade was another's relief. Flat roofs, however, were the smart move. In Egypt's dry climate, they cooled down faster than the baking ground. So, families slept up there under the stars, away from the heat. Some roofs had little walls or wind catchers. They offered airflow and a bit of privacy. At Lahun, staircases led right up to them. At Deir el-Medina, people even built chapels and shelters on top. So clearly, rooftops were prime real estate. Also, inside the homes, especially during the New Kingdom, you'd find cool spots dug into the earth. After all, cellars or half-buried rooms helped beat the heat, and sometimes heavy pottery jars were sunk into the floor. They worked like ancient yetis, keeping food and water cool. As for storage, that was an art. Mud brick granaries were often half-buried and plastered over to stay stable. At sites like Tel Edfu and Ilahun, the silos had snug lids and straw insulation. Grain could last for years in there. Seriously, years. Now, moving on to fashion, most peasants wore linen. They were light, breathable, and made from flax. Dyeing was tricky and expensive, so most clothes were off-white or cream. They may not have been flashy, but they were surely practical. After all, light colors reflect heat. Men usually wore simple linen kilts, called shenties. Women, on the other hand, had straight linen dresses with shoulder straps. Tomb paintings, like those from Menna's tomb, show farmers shirtless, barefoot, or totally naked in extreme heat. And this wasn't scandalous, you know. It was simply logical. Even one Greek visitor wrote that Egyptians worked naked under the sun, and he didn't seem too scandalized either. Clothes were loose enough to let sweat do its job and evaporate. And while wealthy folks had finer linen, peasants made do with the shaggy stuff. It was still better than sweating it out in wool. And when it comes to shoes, they were sort of optional. Most farmers went barefoot, unless the ground got too hot or rough. In that case, they slipped on sandals made from palm fiber or rushes. Those sandals came in all sizes. There were even a few found in Tutankhamun's tomb. For sun protection, cloth head wraps were the norm. Kerchiefs or simple turbans. You'll see them in tomb art. In Nubian art, straw hats pop up too. Some Egyptian texts suggest they might have borrowed that idea, which makes sense. But for kids who were under 6, they were usually naked. That's what the art and texts show. It kept them cool. They also wore protective amulets and sometimes ointments. Older kids dressed like adults. One layer in the heat, maybe more when it got chilly. As for hair, that was a whole other thing. You see, both men and women kept it short or shaved. It was cooler, cleaner, and frankly, more comfortable. And while elite Egyptians often shaved their heads and wore human or plant fiber wigs, poorer folks just kept their hair cropped. Priests, on the other hand, took it to the next level and shaved everything. Head to toe. To them, shaving wasn't vanity, for it kept lice away and made the heat a bit more bearable. And those who could afford wigs usually wore them when they had to, and took them off when the sun started cooking their scalp. Some workers even wore leather skull caps to protect bald heads from sunburn. It was weird, but smart. And let's not forget about makeup. Both men and women wore kohl around the eyes. It helped protect the eyes from sunlight, like ancient eye black. The Egypt Museum actually calls it their version of sunglasses. And here's another fun fact for you. Kohl had antibacterial properties. The lead salts helped boost nitric oxide, which could boost the immune system. So yes, your eyeliner might have doubled as your eye doctor. A New Kingdom vizier once wrote that on really hot days, work stopped at noon. A Middle Kingdom document told supervisors, "Don't push your guys when the sun's blazing. Let them rest." It was more of a practicality than kindness. At Deir el-Medina, for example, tomb builders worked 10 days, then got 2 off. But more sick days showed up in summer. Sick of the heart likely meant heat stroke. Or in other words, it's too hot. I'm done. Small-scale farmers adjusted too. In the hottest part of the day, they'd stop, weave baskets, fix tools, and maybe nap. Then they'd go back out as the sun dropped. Again. Back then, shade was everything. People planted tamarisks and sycamores near fields, canals, and paths. Tomb art even shows grape pickers relaxing under vines or trees. Probably not artistic license. In desert oases like Fayoum and Dakhla, heavy labor waited for winter. So, yeah, ancient Egyptians shaped their lives around the sun. Seasonal shifts and daily routines. This was heat management before HVAC. One modern study summed it up. The heat demands constant concessions, and ancient Egyptians understood that better than most. But in the end, the heat never stopped. And because of that, the Egyptians didn't fight it. They simply worked around it. They changed their days, built smarter. They ate and drank what made sense. And while they didn't have tech, they had timing and patience. And maybe, just maybe, that's the lesson. You don't always need to beat the heat. You just have to learn how to live with it.